I like Karen liking me, so I got to, make her happy. So today, our basic job is to talk about how through the ages we've used God from a reward punishment mentality, right? And reward and punishment are powerful motivators. So we put I have a friend of mine named Sherry, who is a lay pastor, lay speaker. And she says, I found that in my sermons, if I talk about 95% of how bad someone is, then it only takes a little bit of grace to save them. I said, yeah, but is that the gospel? Is that who Jesus was? Was a whole bunch of how bad you are and a little bit of good? Or was it the opposite? But history has taken us down that road, hasn't it?
Well, it has, and I think that part of it is that much of what the church is teaching is what the church wishes Jesus has said. And it's not actually what Jesus said. It's what has been said about Jesus. And some of it was in the Bible, but not all of it.
Yeah.
And so I think that's where the problem is, that, and many people don't even realize that Jesus didn't say a lot of what they think Jesus said.
Yeah, much of what we attribute to Jesus was William Shakespeare.
Yeah, and also what we, I mean, and anyway, even the actual words that Jesus supposedly said that have been reported in the New Testament, we don't really know that he actually said those things.
We don't know.
His actions probably are the best thing to judge by, and his actions were always to love everybody, not just the chosen people.
But Pam, the inferno is such a powerful motivator, right? Keep people out of hell.
That's exactly what it is. It's a motivator.
Yeah, it gets people on your side because you're the solution to this, what I believe is relatively a made-up problem that Jesus didn't talk about. I don't think Jesus talked about the depravity of human beings.
No.
About how awful and terrible we are. And so here's the way to be saved from.
And the only people he really criticized were certain political church leaders. At least that's my understanding.
Yeah.
So
the problem is that when we inside the church read what Jesus says, we aim them all outside. Look what Jesus has said about those bad sinners over there, but not us. And you're right that almost all the teachings, not just from Jesus, but throughout the Bible, right? Paul's letters, everything in the Old Testament where it's prophets speaking against what? The people of God, not typically about somebody else outside of.
Yeah.
And yet we act as though it's all about how to become us.
Yeah.
How to finally get on the right side of God.
I'm curious about how Buddhism escaped that.
Buddhism doesn't use a God figure as much.
Well, that's true.
And that helps a lot in all of this, right? It's basically non-deistic. And so when you don't have a God to run to fix things, to save things, then you construct yourself very differently.
And you don't have a God who's saying you're bad either.
That's right. And I think though that's, for me, that's at least part of how I come to Jesus, is that Jesus is not the father, just wait till your dad comes home figure, right? That's there to be able to enforce the right way of being. It's a whole different vision of what that God is. when Jesus talks about God, it is not in a fearful way. It
No.
is in a drawing way. Let the love that I feel from the divine that's passing through me be how you live also. And that's a whole different way of being able to live life, isn't it?
Yes.
But the problem is we've got to get out of our system, so to speak, all of that which makes it the other, right? Because all of that reward and punishment, if I do the right thing, I go to heaven. If I do the wrong thing, I go to hell. All of that is very pervasive, not just in the world around us, but within our own thinking. Because much of what we do to get by in life is based on systems of reward and punishment.
Yeah.
If I work harder, I get a raise. If I do a good job, teacher gives me an A. And so we understand that system really well, don't we?
Well, it permeates the whole society.
It does. Go ahead, Judy.
It's also the source of a lot of unhappiness.
It
Because
is the source.
when you work hard and don't get the raise, the resentment is palpable.
Yeah. I remember one of my seminary buddies, who's a marvelous pastor, has written books, is an incredible woman, going to one of our teachers and trying to essentially say, I just want to do whatever I have to do to get an A. Right? That driving towards that A, which she'd always gotten, right? She was a brilliant woman. And yet that had taken on a different tenor for her as she was trying to figure out how to get through these seminary classes. How do we not let that continue to be the measurement for us? How do we step into a different place than that? I think it helps if we go back to some of who Jesus was. In Why Christianity Must Change or Die, he does an extended treatise on how the Bible, how it feels like what Jesus was and did changed as we went through Paul and then Mark and then Luke and then Matthew. Did anybody else read that book? Okay.
I have. Not for a long time.
It's quite enlightening to see how we increasingly made Jesus other than human. Increasingly made Jesus divinity wearing a disguise, rather than truly being a human being to walk beside us. And the reason for that is that in Jesus, we see this way of living very different than what most of us find the courage and the ability to be able to live.
Yes.
Right? He somehow escaped some of all the pitfalls that we fall into on a too regular basis. Somehow stood above that. So he must be something more than a typical human being because he did it and we can't. And so we raise him to the level of divine rather than raising ourselves higher towards what he did. Isn't that a sad case of, a sad statement about us, that we can't believe enough in ourselves to do the other?
Because it's so hard. I mean, really, if you think about it, the people of that time were living, well, many of them, until the Gentiles started coming into the Jesus movement, but they were still Jews who were living under the old rules, and there was a reward and punishment system there. So they were already primed for reward and punishment. and also primed for I'm not worthy.
We do a whole lot of I'm not worthy. Or to be more specific, we do
You're
a
not
lot of,
worthy.
you're not worthy. You're not worthy. You're not worthy. And we bang each other over the head on a regular basis on that and put it into our theology. But one of the things that's always stood out to me about that theology, right? All of that sin and evil theology, and we'll get more into this next week, is that fall of Adam, that original sin, that we can't escape that which is at the core of us. But think about what this said. God made this perfect creation, right? Garden of Eden. And Adam and Eve with a single act could destroy it all. Think about what that says. Who really has power in that situation?
The snake.
Yeah. And us, not God. Right? That other than the divine can take it down that easily, that quickly, and can set it all at a wrong point. That to me doesn't feel like the story we should really be telling. So what
It
is
certainly instills, I'm sorry, it certainly instills a lot of fear, though.
it
If
does?
that could happen, then some small or large mistake that I make could unravel a whole lot of stuff that I don't even recognize.
I could destroy the whole world through my actions, type of thing.
Yeah.
But think about just that statement again. In all of these last couple of minutes of statements, who's at the center?
I.
That's exactly right. And it's a very self-centered, at one point, Bishop Spong called it this. Oh, where is that? Self-conscious self-centeredness was the inevitable human reaction. Self-conscious self-centeredness. Now we tell all these stories that very deliberately in very many ways say, I am the center of. No matter how much we say, I'm there because Jesus saved me, it's still I am. Isn't that interesting?
Well, and he talks though about the problem of whatever language you're in does not always have the words that need to be used.
Right.
And so part of our self-centeredness is that we have a lot of words for ourselves,
Yeah.
but not necessarily for other ways of doing things.
Yeah. I'm going to give you a thing that's helped me a lot in areas like this. And Bishop Spong doesn't quite say it this way, but I think I'm right. That's my self-centeredness. The ideas of sin. What are we being saved from? Right? I think we do a whole lot of thinking the more evil we can make each other, like my friend Sherry in her preaching, the more sinful we are, the easier it is to then draw people to a point of needing to be saved. I don't think that's what Jesus was doing. I think Jesus was seeing people at the space where they were at, the space where whatever life had given them, that they were reacting to that. And he was calling them to a higher space than just that. He was saying essentially to Peter, Peter, I know it makes sense from what you've gone through before to see life this way. But what if you see life a different way, from a higher sphere? He's calling us, I believe, to our highest self, not just not drawing ourselves from our lowest self. Does that make sense? And we do a whole lot of in traditional theologies of bringing us back, pulling us down to that lowest space in order to be saved. And it's not that we don't sometimes get in that lowest space, and that sometimes we need that saving from whatever the worst is about us, right? But that's not where we sit most of the time. We sit in our typical normal space most of the time. And so the language of salvation isn't what we're looking for. So what is it we're looking for in our typical space? What is it that God might call into that space? Think of it this way. What are you trying to achieve in life? As you look back through your life, what is it you've tried to make happen because of your life?
I would say that I wanted to and still want to make the world a better place for all of creation, or the earth a better place. And whether that's environmentally or humanistically or relationships, that, the idea is to make it a better place. And I remember a poem that my grandmother used to do that ended about making the world, when I leave, it's a better place than when I came in, something like that. And I think that's a goal, but it's certainly an unachievable goal, I think.
Well, no, it's a very achievable goal. The bad part is that it's
You
not
can't make it
achievable.
perfect.
It's not achievable to perfection,
Right.
right? You don't get to make everything perfect. But I do think that metaphor, better place, is a really good one for all of us. I think we all strive for that. And we strive for it in very different ways. It might be, how do I help my child make choices better than the ones I made? Right? How do I do my job in such a way that something in the world is fixed better than it was before I did that job? Right? I think that's a chief desire of most human beings. That sense of better place in some way or another. And we often do it in horrible ways. Well, it'll be better if I get enough money that I can not have to worry about the rest of you. Right? That's maybe a better place for me, but it's not quite a better place for the world. But
well, I think a lot of people are in survival mode too, though. I think that they're just trying to survive.
Yep, you're right. So I think as a general rule, what all that tells me is that the basic human tug on our hearts is to step out of that normal survival mode and into something that's of a grander sense. And I think for sure that's what I feel Jesus calls out of me. Right? When I read the words that are spoken about him, or that are purported that he spoke, almost always they are a drawing towards something better, grander. And I don't always achieve it. When it says turn the other cheek, I don't do that all the time, but I understand the idea behind it, so that it somehow continues to motivate me in those situations.
And you want to.
And I want
even if you can't achieve it. I think that's the thing.
Yeah. And I think that's the power of those Jesus teachings, is it continually draws me towards that.
Jim, what was that noise?
That was my phone telling me that my wife is supposed to bring my puppy dog over to Briarcrest Vet. So yeah, that's my phone. Sorry, it rang. The problem is if I already have a right answer, then in some ways I know I cease to look. And so Jesus as rescuer, which Bishop Spong really fights against in Why Christianity Must Change, makes it so that I'm already solved. Jesus already rescued me. And I think it retards that which I think Jesus was trying to do, put us on this upward road towards. And I was struck as he went through the book, he started talking about Augustine, right? And Augustine was one of the great theologians that developed this theology of atonement and the need for it, and start us down. Well, he didn't start us down the road, but he definitely perfected much of that, which says that we are evil. At one point, I think he said that original sin was essential to Augustine's understanding of the universe. At the same time that I was reading this stuff, I was reading a book by John Philip Newell. Does anybody know John Philip Newell?
Yep.
The book I'm reading is called Sacred Earth, Sacred Soul. And what he's looking at is Celtic teachings through the ages. And so one of the characters he's looking at is Pelagius. You ever heard of Pelagius? Pelagius and Augustine were this. They fought each other. Pelagius was taking, in fact, Augustine got Pelagius excommunicated because he was more Celtic. This book is all about Celtic thought and how it continues to speak in stuff. And so one of the things that Augustine held on to was the doctrine of creation ex nihilo, creation out of nothing. That we weren't created of God's self, but we were created out of nothing. Pelagius didn't believe that, because if God is the infinite, the eternal, what else is there to create out of? Creates out of God's self. And so we are literally created of God, and that within our core there's something that is that's calling us always to that highest space that sometimes maybe gets pushed down and forgotten and is told is not there. But Pelagius, as well as Christ, I think, are saying, no, listen to that space, find that which is your better self and strive for it. Where Augustine was more of a, don't look inside yourself, because all you're going to see is the evil that you are. Look beyond yourself. I have to tell you, I like Pelagius much more than Augustine in that. And I think that's part of at least where Bishop Spong is drawing us. Is the movement away from evil or towards our better selves, our best selves?
Do you think that because Israel was under the thumb of Rome at that time, that, well, it could be one of two ways, that people felt like we must have done something bad because look what has happened to us. And we have history from the Old Testament that every time one of us sins, God punishes us. And so that this whole idea of being rescued would come from that. I don't know, or whether that, like with Augustine, they're just wanting to be able to control people, and it has nothing to do with really anything else.
Well, I think there's always the dysfunction of an organization trying to control. I think that defines much of our history. If I want to be the fixer of humanity, then I've got to control you to understand my narrative so that you see that I have the solution. So I think there's always that. A hard part. What? Go ahead.
If I want to fix America, I have to control you too.
That's right. I have to tell you why everything is wrong. And if you look at much of the Republican, or I should say conservative thing right now. It's about what's wrong, what's not fixed. And I have the right answers for that. I just don't think it's that easy. You know, one of the things I really get mad at in my heart towards Christians right now is that they have a sense that everything has to fall apart in order for Jesus to come back again.
Yes.
You know, I don't think we need a rescuer to fix it. I think we are called to be the fixer in the moment, to be the hands and feet of Christ in this moment. And if all we're doing is waiting for the great miraculous one to come back, I think we're missing the point. Jesus for me is not he who did, but he who acted in such a way that draws me towards acting that same way. The one empowers me to become, the other is just something else has to fix it. I don't know about you, but the teachers I remember best are not the ones who limited me, but the ones who opened me up to who I could become. And it feels like much of our Christian theology, especially when it comes to reward and punishment, are just trying to give out gold stars.
Yes, yes.
And I just don't think gold stars are of God, right? I think God is different than that. But we easily fall back on rewards and punishments, right? Because they, in a simplistic way, solve something for a moment. But what do they do in the long run? So how, go ahead.
I was just thinking about what a fine line it is between reward and punishment, and recognizing and acknowledging the best in somebody. I mean, with little kids in first grade, I was not a teacher who gave out stickers and that kind of thing. But I did work at acknowledging when people were doing the right or the helpful thing. It wasn't necessarily right, but it helped the process.
Yeah, yeah.
But it could easily lapse into praise, which is a reward.
Yep.
And I always felt like I didn't want them working for my praise. I wanted them to work for their own self strengthening, feeling good about themselves. And it was tricky, and it remains tricky.
Because me being able to say, I'm proud of you is a good thing, right? And that's a motivating thing, or could be a motivating thing to somebody. But ultimately, you want them to say they're proud of themselves.
Yep.
Right. And that's a trickier thing to do, because I can control the words and the actions that come out of me aimed at them, but I can't control as much whatever's going on inside their own head. And so we sit in a place where trusting the other leaves it out of my hands to some degree. And as an organization, institutions don't like surviving by trusting something that's out of their hands. Institutions like having control about how things work. And so we took the more wide open Jesus that was spoken in the 30s, and little by little placed him under the control of certain doctrines,
Boxed him up.
boxed him up because we could.
Well, and also because that's the way we could talk about it.
Right.
Maybe
Maybe.
that our failures in language tempt us to simplify and organize that way.
Yeah. At one point in New Christianity, Spong said that that the way that we've done something by making Jesus of a different substance, that Jesus is divine, not human at all. He said, therefore, he's different from every other human being in kind instead of degree. That somehow he was able to do something that we couldn't because we're not of that kind. And I think that's the problem. I think that for me, the power of Jesus is that I am of his kind. Right? He did it better than me, but that doesn't mean I can't strive towards. Instead, if we make him something other than me, then we develop theologies that say, and you can't alone. You have to only trust. Now, I believe I can't alone because I'm not enough to be able to solve all the problems I see, either within myself or around me. But that doesn't mean I'm not of the same kind as Jesus.
I was thinking of that song, Trust and Obey. I used to sing that so much when I was a child in church. We sang it a lot.
Yep.
And I'm not sure I really believed it necessarily. I just like to sing it.
Right. It's a good song.
But that's really what that is. Trust and obey rather than strive to be like, strive to, because trust is really not an action thing.
Right. Or it is, but the hard part is it's often defined as not an action. Trust means just sit there. It's often been defined as just sit there and wait for Jesus to do it.
Yeah. And if you do what you're supposed to do, trust that you'll get a reward.
Yeah. But true trust is taking the steps towards perpetuating whatever it is that you think that you're trying to emulate. Right? I don't think Jesus, as I read the human Jesus, would ever be sitting there going, just sit there and wait for me. He was forever with the people around them, challenging them to something more than what they'd been. Right? And he did a lot of get up and do something. Get up and be something. I also want to move to a different spot of this whole thing. That this is one of my other bottom lines about the rescuer, the reward and punishment thing. So who are we being rescued from ultimately?
God.
It feels like it, doesn't it? Right? If there's a price for sin, as my conservatives will often say, my question is, well, who are we paying the price to? Who did Jesus pay the price to? Well, the only answer I can come up with is, well, the ultimate controller of the universe, God, right? And if God, why does God need a price? If God is love, can God say the price is paid without having to hang someone on a cross to do that?
I always chuckle at that image of God as an accountant keeping
Yeah.
track of things. That's a lousy job.
Yeah.
If I were God, I wouldn't want that job. That's ridiculous.
And yet I think we do that type of thing because we do so much accounting in life. We do a whole lot of, look what I've done for you, so go clean your room. I clean the rest of the house, so you can do that one little thing for me.
And it's all got to be fair according to my perception.
Yeah, and because I have to live in that kind of world, right? That if you've worked hard enough, then you get a raise. We think that that must be how God works, and we extend the human interaction into the divine. But again, who does God pay? Only God's self, right? There's nobody else to pay. It's not like he hands the money over to the devil and says, okay, now you're satisfied.
Where does grace come into this reward and punishment system?
Yeah. And you know, what they would say is that Jesus gives this salvation freely. All you have to do is accept it. Right? That's where it's at. But grace to me is much larger than that. How do you understand grace?
There, it's attached to acceptance and forgiveness for me. But it's more than that.
It is more than that. Hard part is that grace is it's a very large word. I mean, it may only have 5 letters in it, but it contains a whole lot of content and value.
Maybe we ought to do a study on 5-letter words of power.
You know what I say? You know what I say about the 4 big Christmas words, right? Love, peace, joy, and hope. I call them the 4-letter words because they average out to 4 letters, right? The 4-letter words of God. And they're very powerful words, aren't they? But they're also ones that are hugely undefined by easy definitions. We try to. Love is falling in love. Well, anybody who's been in love for a while knows that falling in love is no longer applicable, right? That something else has entered into that space. And I think it's the same thing with grace, that grace is not just the simplistic way that we start, but much larger than that.
I guess my thinking of, you hear somebody say, well, by the grace of God, something happened, and it makes it seem like, well, it was a good day, so God let this, this happen, even though maybe you were still a sinner, but by his grace, you got saved. And so if God had a good day, there's the grace for you. If he doesn't, and he's out with his fire and brimstone, well, too bad. And that's the problem that I think with grace, because I love to hear that there is no boundary of grace.
Yeah.
That grace is really sort of like an all-consuming thing or all available thing. But
Okay.
a lot of times we think it's limited, and yet we hear, no, it's not limited. And so it is a very difficult thing to put your arms around.
But you know why the limits of grace are really hard for us? Because we know why you shouldn't have grace, right? We can all see, we can extend grace in some ways to our own self, because we can see the goodness of our own self beyond just the evil that we've been or done. But we can't always see that in others. And so we set up these things of reward and punishment to be able to fix what it is that we still see wrong about, instead of seen it very differently.
Sometimes I think it's even harder to see it in ourselves, though.
It can be, depending on how we've encapsulated the stories.
Yeah, it's. And I think about the word graceful, and I've never been.
Yeah.
So, I miss that piece of being graceful.
But you have been grace-filled.
Probably at times I
Well, no,
recognize
on a
that.
regular basis, I see grace-filled, whether or not you're graceful. I don't know. But you have been grace-filled.
That clumsiness is funny to me. It just,
Yeah.
but the grace in some people's cases seems to be doled out like the spoonful of sugar. In Mary Poppins, it's
Right.
you get a little bit and it makes you want more, but you only get so much at a time.
But the reality is, my sense about world is even in the moments when I've had the worst of, there's been plenty of grace around me still that I don't often recognize. Right? When I was going through my struggles, I was up in Round Valley, my deepest spiritual struggles. Somehow my first grade team, my principal, the folks who worked at the school where I was at, gave me a lot of grace that helped me get through what was undoubtedly not a perfect year as a teacher. And I didn't recognize it at the time. Just like sometimes when I'm driving a little bit less than perfectly on the highway, I survive because someone else puts on their brake more than what, and they're more responsible for me not getting in an accident than what I am. They give me that space of grace. So there's part of what Jesus is for me is that which calls me to my best self and continually says that best self is possible, even though I prove it again and again that not right now. Right?
I'm too busy today.
Yeah, too busy today. And I don't think that, so like I said, sin for me is our typical human behavior. It is not the depravity that we sometimes make it into, the really low stuff. It's just normal and who we really are. But what's calling me to that higher self? And that, to me, at least partially, is the Christ figure. And Christ can call in a lot of different ways. Sometimes it's the sit down and listen for a while. But sometimes it's get up and become something in this moment. So how do we help to speak that Jesus differently? We go back to what I was talking about, Celtic theology. John Philip Newell asserts that essentially what Pelagius was saying is that everything is essentially sacred, which is not what we preach a lot in church, right? That they're sacred and there's all this stuff that is not sacred. But what if there is that essence of God in all things? We just have to find it. There's a reason, for example, why I talk about rock groups that you guys don't know. And that's that Very often the words of music have been more the voice of God than the words of Bible. That there was something sacred in that I wasn't recognizing or hearing in Scripture.
You know, if everybody believed that the whole world was sacred, maybe they'd take better care of the planet. You know, I think that that's part of the problem, that they don't realize that the physical world is sacred. They think that the physical world is evil. Some people.
Yeah, there's a huge evil that is placed on the world. But what if we see all of world and each of the people in it as sacred?
Other, yes.
How does that change the way we view each other and interact with each other?
That would be the true miracle.
Yeah. The hard part is that goes very against much of this Augustinian original sin, the depravity of humanity narrative that is so pervasive within Christianity. But I would venture to say that that's also why we are losing generations of people who are moved by Christianity, because they know that's no longer true. That their evilness doesn't speak them as much as their possibilities.
No.
And at least that's part of what Christ is for me, is it's a speaking of possibilities. What can you become? So how do we fight both that within ourselves, which says that still, because we all have reward and punishment very ingrained within us. We all have that which draws us back to that theology, versus how do we step into this other way of being? How do we hold Christ, specifically for this week? How do we hold Christ up in a way that doesn't say he died on the cross to save me from my sin? What else do we say, and how do we say it?
Partly for me is that every birth is a miracle. That every child that's born has so much potential and could possibly change the world.
Which is, for me, in some ways, the really tragic thing about original sin, and like I said, we'll get to that more next week, is that we look at this absolutely perfect human being and say, oh yeah, but bears the scar of original sin, so we have to baptize him to make it so we save him. Isn't that an interesting way that we've taken what I think in many ways are the most perfect among us, these children, and we turn them into scarred individuals?
Yeah, it's ridiculous. I'm thinking about the crucifixion too, really. He doesn't talk too much about that in the writings that we looked at. That,
yeah, we'll get more to that
because
when we get to atonement and whatnot.
Someone said he had to be crucified.
Yeah.
And that's always bothersome to me, that, why did he have to be crucified? Yeah. To me, it's an event that happened in the political realm of that time, both political in the church or the synagogue, as well as the Romans. And, but, you hear that thing, he had to be crucified.
Yeah.
And it's very bothersome to me.
Yeah, yeah. And you're exactly right. How do we escape from that type of, because I think Bishop Spong said that all of this language has become so ingrained in us, we can't excise it, we can only modify it. And yet what we have to do is modify it. We have to, what we have to do is excise it.
Yes, we do.
That type of language is no longer serving the purpose that it once maybe was able to do. Right now, it's just, it is in the way of.
That's one of the scariest things for me right now, is that coalition of political and church, or some versions of church.
Yeah.
That's a really,
that is an unholy union.
that's a danger. It's a dangerous combination.
Yeah.
The whole idea of a sacrificial lamb, maybe the whole country, I don't know, but it's it feels parallel to me.
It does.
In some ways, to that Easter story of the church is saying it, and the government is backing it up. It's like ridiculous.
Yeah. And I understand where it came from, that Old Testament theology of let's make a sacrifice to the one above.
Yes.
Right, to the greater power. But the idea that God has to sacrifice a lamb to who? Why is it that why is that?
That shows that that's really not straight thinking.
Right. Right.
Yeah, sacrificing something to God to be pleasing to him is one thing, but to
extend that out.
Extend that out, that God really sacrifices Jesus. That's really bizarre thinking.
Yeah. Yeah. So at the end of
a lot of bizarre things going on.
Non-logical thinking too, really. I mean, and I'm a person who gets really upset when things aren't logical.
Right. And the hard part is,
I don't even hold.
Go ahead.
I don't hold logic all that hard, but bizarre just really sets me off. Like, where is there a thread to follow in this? There's just no cohesion to it for me.
But when you're talking in areas like we're talking about, where things have been set up for power and control
for centuries,
it's not about logic. It's about saying you just have to because I said so, and because it's easier for me, and because it benefits me. And somehow we have to get beyond those types of spaces, right? Do we see God as one more space of power? I don't believe, for example, that Jesus believed in devil the way we believe in devil. But today, my strong Christ-believing friends, I think, believe in devil more than what they do in Christ. They believe in that has to be defeated more than they believe in the strength of what Christ can call out of them. And at least part of me, what Jesus was doing was saying that we are that which solves the problems of the world.
Why do we have to have that dualism?
Oof.
We've got good, we've got to have bad, it's an ancient construct that needs to be jettisoned.
Right. And it goes back way beyond Christ. That Christ drew from Plato and other Greek thinkers in that, or I shouldn't say Christ so much as
those who
he did
described
some,
him. Yeah.
but definitely the people who interpreted him saw through that dualistic space. And you're right, dualism is not a good way of viewing things. I've known very few people that I would even place mostly in evil or mostly in good, right? We're all this wonderful mixture of both, right? and our job is to try to maximize that which betters the world, using the space you were at, gets this to be a better place instead of the opposite. So let me read a poem that Bishop Spong wrote and placed at the end of the book that I was reading about A New Jesus. He wrote it in 2007, and he wrote this poem for the end of his book. It's called Christ Power. Look at him. Look not at his divinity, but look rather at his freedom. Look not at the exaggerated tales of his power, but look rather at his infinite capacity to give himself away. Look not at the first century mythology that surrounds him, but look rather at his courage to be, his ability to live, and the contagious quality of his love. Stop your frantic search, be still, and know that this is God. This love, this freedom, this life, this being. And when you are accepted, accept yourself. When you are forgiven, forgive yourself. When you are loved, love yourself. Grasp that Christ power and dare to be yourself.
Wow.
Isn't that a great thing that he wrote?
It is.
That to me is at least trying to embody much of what we're speaking of here. How do we grasp the Christ power and essentially become that Christ power in our sphere of influence? Because you're right, Judy, that sometimes the stories we tell about ourselves keep us from stepping into that. The stories we tell about others keep them from stepping into it. But what if we tell the story of what I think essentially the Jesus of the Bible did that changed the world? Right? Because something of how he acted and what he did made it so that people were completely different on the other side. And how do we do that again? How do we let that same power change us in that same way? It sounds like we've almost solved Jesus.
I think
Go ahead,
I
Judy.
think that's the call to awareness. I just think that's the call to awareness for the 26th of December.
Well, that could be. I'll send it to you. So,
That poem.
so you've got it. It's a great poem, isn't it?
Yes.
It is.
I'll send it to you, and you
Yeah.
can decide if it sounds like what you want to do.
I think it's, and I think the beauty of it is that it's more invitational than confrontational.
Right, and it's not saying
It
that.
invites us in.
That's right. It's not saying that right now that you're
It
going to have
invites
total
us in
acceptance of
rather than-
yourself, but when you do, as you do, right? All right, my friends, next week we are doing original sin, which of course each one of you is a supreme example of carrying original sin. Just kidding.
Do we really have to work that hard the week of Christmas?
The good news is we have 3 weeks. We're not doing next week. This is our last time until, oh, let's go
Looks
back
like
to my,
January 5th.
yeah. So January 5th is our next time. And there's only 2 chapters that I found that talk about these. Other things do. There's 1 chapter from A New Christianity and 1 from Unbelievable. And so it'll be relatively simple. Go and enjoy Christmas and be with family if that's what you have planned. And I will get these 2 chapters out to you so that you can be prepared for the 5th to take care of all that original sin. All right.
All right.
So I'll miss you guys next week.
I will miss you. These have been great discussions. I appreciate each one of you.
Have a great holiday, Judy and Martha. I won't see you before.
Same to you, love. Take care.
All right.
Okay,
Bye-bye.
bye.